Samson, the story of the Bible's strongest man. To contextualize Samson's birth, it's crucial to note that during that time, Israel was under the oppression of the Philistines. Samson, born in Nazareth, was divinely chosen to play a pivotal role in Israel, blessed with extraordinary strength to fulfill this mission. His life story is chronicled in the book of Judges. The Israelites, once again disobeying divine commandments, led the Lord to deliver them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years, as detailed in chapter 13, verse 1 of the book of Judges. In this backdrop, we meet Manoah and his wife, who was unable to conceive. Described in the book of Judges, chapter 13, verse 2, Manoah was from the Danite clan and his wife was barren. It was to her that the angel of the Lord appeared, proclaiming that she would conceive and bear a son despite her barrenness. This son was destined to be Israel's next liberator, a truly miraculous event. Such miraculous births, promised to previously childless couples, recur throughout the Bible, as seen in the stories of Isaac in the Old Testament and John in the New Testament. Growing up, this promised child was tasked with liberating Israel from Philistine rule. This great responsibility was coupled with a special stipulation. He was to be raised under a Nazirite vow, as outlined in the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verse 15. This vow required specific abstinence and consecration practices, distinguishing Samson from other Israeli judges. Nazirites, during the period of their vow, were subject to strict rules of conduct. They had to abstain from drinking wine and any other fermented drink, as well as avoid vinegar made from these beverages. They could not consume grape juice, fresh grapes, or raisins either. Throughout the duration of the vow, they were not allowed to consume anything that came from the vine, including seeds or skins. Moreover, they had to avoid using razors on their hair, allowing it to grow as a sign of their holiness and dedication to the Lord until the end of their consecration. Interestingly, the angel also advised Manoah's wife to abstain from wine and beer during pregnancy, as well as avoid any food considered unclean. This indicated that her son would be consecrated to God from the womb, following the practices of the Nazirite vow. The story continues with Manoah's wife's reaction to the encounter with the angel. Despite having received the message directly, she made it a point to share the revelation with her husband. In the book of Judges, chapter 13, verses 8 to 13, Manoah, driven by a desire to better understand the divine will, prayed for the man of God to return and instruct them on how to raise the son that was to come. God heeded Manoah's request, and the angel of God returned to the wife while she was alone in the field. Sensing the angel's presence, she hurriedly ran to meet her husband, to inform him that the same man who had visited her before had appeared again. Together they sought to understand and fulfill the purpose that God had set for their unborn son. Faced with Manoah's fear, who believed that they would die for having seen God, his wife reassured him wisely. She argued that if the Lord had intended to kill them, he would not have accepted the offerings they presented, nor would he have revealed so many wonders or given such detailed instructions about the future of their son. With this understanding, Manoah's concerns were alleviated. Subsequently, the couple's son was born, and his wife named him Samson. The boy grew up under the blessings of the Lord, and the Spirit of God began to move in him, preparing him for the challenges and missions to come. Samson was destined for a life of dedication and service to God from his birth, illustrating the idea that God can use anyone despite their personal flaws. However, Samson made questionable decisions throughout his life. An example of this was his decision to marry a young Philistine woman. Despite the advice of his parents, who preferred that he choose a wife from the people of Israel, Samson insisted that this Philistine was the right woman for him. His parents did not know that Samson's interest in that woman was part of divine plans. The Lord sought, through this union, to create a pretext for a confrontation with the Philistines, who at that time dominated Israel. During his journey to Timnah, where his future wife lived, Samson faced an extraordinary challenge that demonstrated his supernatural power bestowed by God. As he approached the vineyards of Timnah, a young and ferocious lion emerged, roaring towards him. At this critical moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Samson, and he managed to tear the lion apart with his bare hands, as if the animal were as fragile as a young goat. Remarkably, Samson chose to keep this event a secret, not even revealing to his parents what had occurred. After this incident, Samson continued on his way, met the woman he liked, and began preparations for the wedding. During a feast which served as an engagement celebration, Samson proposed a riddle to the Philistines present. The wager for solving the riddle within 7 days was 30 changes of clothes, which at that time were considered symbols of honor and status. Inspired by recent events, including his victory over the lion and finding honey within the carcass of the animal, Samson formulated the riddle, "Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet." This riddle directly reflected his experience with the lion, although in a veiled manner, as he had not shared that story with anyone. The engagement feast organized by Samson followed the traditions of the time, and during the event 30 men were selected to be his companions at the feast. This festive moment, however, also set the stage for future conflicts and challenges Samson would face with the Philistines, as the complex dynamics of his life began to unfold. During the wedding feast, Samson issued an intriguing challenge to the Philistine guests to solve a riddle within 7 days. The prize for the correct answer would be 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If they failed to solve it, the Philistines would have to pay the same amount to Samson. The riddle posed by Samson was, "Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet." In the first 3 days of the feast, the Philistines could not decipher the riddle, which caused great frustration and anger among them. Feeling cornered by the possibility of losing the bet, some men threatened the life of Samson's bride, demanding that she discover her husband's answer and share it with them. Pressured and frightened by the threat against her family, she pleaded and cried before Samson until he, exhausted by the constant harassment, revealed the solution to the riddle. Subsequently, when a Philistine man presented the correct answer, Samson realized that his wife had been coerced into betraying him. Moved by divine fury, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went to another city where he killed 30 Philistine men, taking their garments to fulfill his part of the wager. Weary and furious, Samson returned home, leaving his wife behind. Sometime later, wishing to reconcile, he tried to visit his wife, only to discover that her father had given her hand to another man, believing that Samson no longer wished to be with her. In response to this betrayal and the ongoing conflict with the Philistines, Samson orchestrated a devastating act of revenge. He captured 300 foxes, tied their tails together in pairs, attached torches to them, and released them into the Philistine crops, thus setting their fields on fire. During the wheat harvest season, Samson, carrying a young goat as a gift, attempted to visit his wife. However, upon arrival, he was informed by her father that she had been given to another man, as he thought Samson no longer loved her. The father even suggested that Samson could take her younger sister instead, whom he considered more attractive. Outraged by the situation and seeing an opportunity to justify his vengeance, Samson declared that he had every right to seek revenge on the Philistines for this insult. In response, Samson executed an extremely creative and destructive act of retaliation. He captured 300 foxes, tied them in pairs by their tails, and affixed torches to each pair. After lighting the torches, he released the foxes into the Philistine wheat fields, setting not only the grains but also the vineyards and olive groves ablaze. The devastation was immense, affecting the economy and livelihood of the Philistines. In retaliation for Samson's act, the Philistines went to his wife's house and killed her along with her father, burning them to death. Upon learning of this horrific act of vengeance, Samson swore not to stop until he had fully avenged himself on the Philistines. He then attacked many of them with great ferocity, killing a large number. After his vengeance, Samson withdrew to a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines, seeking retribution, surrounded a village in Judah in an attempt to capture Samson. Meanwhile, in an effort to appease the Philistines, the men of Judah went to the cave where Samson was hiding, hoping to resolve the situation without further bloodshed. When 3,000 men from Judah went to Samson to arrest him, they expressed the irony of the situation. They were handing over to the Philistines the man whom God had chosen to deliver them. They explained to Samson that they needed to bind him and hand him over to avoid further trouble, assuring him, however, that they would not kill him. Samson agreed to submit to them on the condition that they would not take his life. After being tied with 2 new ropes and brought before the Philistines, the encounter escalated when the Philistines, seeing him bound, approached shouting, believing he was defenseless. However, at that exact moment, the Spirit of the Lord descended upon Samson with great power. This was a bad sign for the Philistines, as it indicated that he was far from being a defeated adversary. With divine strength, the ropes that bound Samson became like burnt flax, completely freeing him. He then found a fresh jawbone of a donkey and used it as a weapon to kill 1,000 men. This extraordinary event, clearly divine, demonstrated that even in apparent disadvantage, Samson's strength, driven by the Spirit of God, was devastating. After the confrontation, exhausted and extremely thirsty, Samson cried out to the Lord. God responded to his cry mercifully, causing a spring to emerge from which Samson could quench his thirst. This spring was subsequently named En-Hakkore, meaning Spring of the Caller. Divine intervention not only saved Samson from thirst, but also symbolized the renewal of his strength to continue his leadership over Israel, which lasted for 20 years. After a strenuous confrontation, God provided a miracle for Samson by opening a hollow place in Lehi, from which water sprang. Drinking from this water, Samson regained his strength and revived, which is why the spring was named En-Hakkore, a place that remains a landmark to this day. This divine intervention allowed Samson to continue leading Israel for 20 years during the Philistine period, marked by miraculous acts whenever the Spirit of the Lord descended upon him. These episodes illustrate how, in the Old Testament, the Spirit of the Lord manifested in a timely and powerful manner to enable individuals to perform extraordinary deeds at specific moments. However, with the coming of Christ and the advent of the New Testament, this dynamic changed significantly. As described in Ephesians and Romans, the Spirit began to dwell continuously in believers, becoming a constant presence that guides, strengthens, and sanctifies. This transformation not only reflects a change in the way God interacts with his people, but also underscores the responsibility of each believer to live according to the Spirit. Paul, in his epistles, reinforces this call, as in Galatians, where he advises believers to walk by the Spirit in order not to succumb to the desires of the flesh. Ephesians also echoes this teaching, urging the faithful not to get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery, but to be filled with the Spirit, living under its influence and authority. These teachings are crucial as they highlight the shift from a divine grace that manifested episodically to one that is a continual presence. They also emphasize the importance of recognizing that presence in our daily lives, allowing it to shape and guide us in every decision and action. In contrast to the often questionable choices of Samson, who, despite being endowed with supernatural power, frequently struggled with his own human weaknesses. In the narrative of Samson, his behavior in Gaza reflects the major failures of Israel, as documented in the book of Judges. Israel, as a people, had deviated from the Lord's commandments, turning to the worship of other gods and following idolatrous practices. They had spiritually prostituted themselves, abandoning the path their ancestors had followed under divine guidance. Samson, as a leader, unfortunately mirrored that same trend of infidelity. His decision to spend the night with a prostitute in Gaza was not just an act of personal disobedience, but also symbolized the ongoing moral decay of Israel at that time. Although he was a man chosen by God and endowed with supernatural strength, his personal choices often were not aligned with God's will. When the Philistines learned that Samson was in the city with the prostitute, they saw an opportunity to capture him. They set a guard at the city's exit, waiting to apprehend him at dawn. However, Samson, demonstrating once more his extraordinary strength, tore off the massive gates of the city gate, including the frames and the crossbar, carried them on his shoulders, and took them to the top of a mountain facing Hebron. This impressive act, though carried out by a man who was clearly straying from God's ways, shows that the Lord had not completely abandoned him yet. Still, this display of strength did not correct the flaws in his character, nor the consequences of his choices. After the bold act of carrying away the gates of Gaza City, Samson encountered a new central figure in his life, Delilah. Located in the valley of Sorek, Delilah captured Samson's heart, but her true loyalties were with the Philistines, who desired to uncover the secret of Samson's incomparable strength to overpower him. The Philistine leaders saw in Delilah an opportunity to discover that secret. They approached her with a lucrative proposal to persuade Samson to reveal the source of his strength. In return, they promised her a generous reward of 1,100 pieces of silver from each of them, as described in the book of Judges, chapter 16, verse 5. Delilah accepted the Philistines' offer and began her mission to extract the secret of Samson's strength. On 3 occasions, she attempted to have Samson reveal the mystery, but each time he told her a false tale, diverting the truth. However, Delilah's persistence was relentless. Using a tactic similar to that previously employed by Samson's bride, she accused him of not truly loving her, questioning how he could claim to love her if he did not trust her with his greatest secret. This approach wore Samson down emotionally. The constant pressure and accusations of lack of love and trust undermined his resilience. Eventually, under that intense emotional pressure, Samson gave in and revealed the true secret of his strength. That his power lay in the fact that his hair had never been cut, a vow he had maintained from birth as part of his consecration to God. Delilah's attempts to uncover the secret of Samson's strength are a clear example of manipulation and betrayal within the narrative. Initially, Samson deceives Delilah, providing false answers to test her loyalty and keep his secret protected. With each of Delilah's failed attempts, she becomes more insistent and cunning, using emotion to pressure him into revealing the truth. First, Samson told Delilah that if he were tied with 7 fresh bowstrings, he would become weak like any other man. Delilah, following his instructions, tied him while he slept, with men hidden and ready to capture him. When she alerted him to the Philistines' approach, Samson easily broke the bowstrings, proving that the information he had given was false. Delilah then confronted Samson for having deceived her and insisted that he reveal the true secret of his strength. Samson, still toying with her, proposed another falsehood, being tied with new ropes that had never been used. Delilah repeated the process, but again, Samson effortlessly freed himself when the Philistines tried to capture him. Persistent, Delilah made a third attempt. This time, Samson suggested that if his 7 locks of hair were woven into a loom and secured with a pin, he would become weak. Delilah wove Samson's locks while he slept and secured them with the pin. However, when she called the Philistines, Samson once again easily escaped, tearing away the pin and the loom. At each step, Samson challenges Delilah, testing how far she would go to discover his secret. Delilah, in turn, increases the pressure, frustrated by the continuous disappointments. This sequence of events heightens the dramatic tension in the narrative, culminating in Samson's eventual betrayal when he finally reveals the true secret of his strength. The dynamics between Samson and Delilah illustrate a complex interplay of power, betrayal, and vulnerability, highlighting how even the strongest man can be undone by the emotional manipulation and betrayal of someone he trusted. The story of Samson and Delilah is one of the most dramatic tales of betrayal and consequences in the Bible. Delilah's constant pressure and emotional manipulation led Samson to reveal the secret of his extraordinary strength. His hair, which had never been cut due to his Nazirite vow, dedicated to God from birth. Samson confessed that if his hair were cut, he would lose his divine strength and become vulnerable like any other man. Delilah, now aware of Samson's true secret, did not hesitate to betray him. While he slept on her lap, she called someone to cut his hair, effectively stripping him of his strength. This act was facilitated by the Philistine leaders, who were hidden and ready to capture him, having promised Delilah a substantial reward for her betrayal. When Samson awoke, he tried to free himself as he had done on previous occasions, but he quickly realized that something was terribly wrong. He did not know that the Lord had left him, and his strength had disappeared. This was a crucial moment, marking the beginning of his downfall. His eyes were gouged out, he was shackled and forced to work in the Philistine prison, a humiliating fate for someone who had been chosen by God to lead and liberate Israel. This tragic episode highlights the importance of loyalty and devotion to God above any human relationship. Samson allowed his relationship with Delilah to surpass his devotion to God, a decision that had devastating consequences for his life. He was manipulated and betrayed by someone who placed personal gain above true affection, illustrating how personal desires can blind and lead to ruin. Samson's fall serves as a powerful reminder that when God is removed from the center of a person's life, space is opened for the destructive influence of evil. In the 16th chapter of the book of Judges, verses 18 to 22, a significant episode from the life of Samson is recounted. When Delilah realized that Samson had revealed all his secrets to her, she notified the Philistine rulers that he had finally confessed everything. The Philistine leaders immediately returned, bringing silver with them. After making Samson sleep on her lap, Delilah called a man to cut the 7 locks of Samson's hair, initiating the process of his subjugation and resulting in the loss of his strength. Realizing the danger, Delilah alerted Samson that the Philistines were upon him. Awakening from sleep, Samson thought he could free himself, as he had done before, not realizing that the Lord had already left him. The Philistines then captured him, gouged out his eyes, and took him to Gaza, where he was chained with bronze shackles and forced to grind grain in prison. However, Samson's hair began to grow again, indicating that his story was not yet finished. The regrowth of Samson's hair symbolized his internal repentance and the renewal of his connection with God. This repentance would be clearly manifested in his next prayer. Sometimes, to fully capture someone's attention, God may bring that person to their lowest point. While at the bottom of the pit, Samson's hair grew as the Philistines planned to celebrate their apparent victory over their adversary, offering a great sacrifice to their God. The Philistine celebration occurred while Samson continued to grind grain in prison. Filled with jubilation, they summoned Samson to entertain the crowd at the temple, placing him between the pillars. Unbeknownst to them, by doing so, they put themselves in a vulnerable position for what was to come. The temple was filled with people, with about 3,000 on the roof, all unaware of Samson's final act. Recognizing his desperate situation, Samson called on the Lord for strength one last time, with the purpose of bringing down the temple roof upon his adversaries. With all the strength he could muster, he pushed against the columns, causing the temple to collapse and crush the leaders and all those present. In the 16th chapter, verses 23 to 28 of the book of Judges, it is recounted that the rulers of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate the capture of Samson, proclaiming that their god had delivered the enemy into their hands. As the people exalted their god, they demanded that Samson be brought out to entertain them. When he was placed between the temple's columns, Samson asked the servant who held his hand to position him so that he could feel the pillars that supported the building, to lean on them. The place was packed with people, including all the rulers of the Philistines, and about 3,000 men and women were watching Samson's performance from the roof. It was then that Samson prayed to the Lord, asking to be remembered and strengthened once more, wishing to avenge himself on the Philistines for his lost eyes. With that final act, Samson killed more oppressors on that day than he had in his entire life. Although Samson succumbed to the idolatrous cultural influences around him and made several questionable decisions, he is mentioned in the 11th chapter, verses 32 to 33, of the letter to the Hebrews in the Hall of Faith, alongside other righteous heroes of the Old Testament such as Daniel. This recognition fills the heart with hope, for despite his imperfections, Samson believed that God could use him to fulfill his purposes.